Welcome. I'm going to read, to get started, a passage from Colossians. It's one of my favorite passages. Colossians 3, verse 12 through 17. It says, "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." So Colossians is one of the Bible studies that's coming up. It gives you a little bit of a taste of what you would study in that book. There are 3 studies starting on March 3rd. One study starting on March 3rd, 1 Peter. Unfortunately, the registration for that is closed. But on March 10th, we have Nehemiah and the book of Colossians. Both of those studies will run for 8 weeks, and registration is still open for those. And if you want to register tonight, you can register at the kiosk. And then March Teach Me, if you can save the date for that, March 14th, Amber Hart is going to be speaking to us on biblical rest, which I think is pretty appropriate right now for where we are at in our culture. And then the last announcement before we get to listen to Amy tonight is the podcast series. Over the last few months, they've been interviewing the women's ministry team leaders, and that goes out as a podcast. There's a new one coming out this Wednesday. You can find that on either Apple or Spotify. It's just a really nice way to get to know the leaders that are on the women's ministry committee. And then our speaker for tonight is Amy. Just on a personal note, Amy is in our faith group, and she's been an amazing help to my husband and I these last 2 months. We went through a very traumatic event with our daughter last year, and all 3 of us were really struggling with trauma in our lives. And Amy came into our lives and came to visit the one evening and just really laid out for us a pathway forward in terms of how to deal with the trauma and how to take time out for the caregivers that are dealing with the trauma. And she's been an incredible help personally in our lives. And so I know that the message that she's going to bring to you this evening is going to be one that is filled with just amazing truth and direction for us as we struggle with this. How do we as caregivers take time out to make sure that we are strong and making sure that we are resting and caring for ourselves? So Amy is married to Ed, and they've been serving in missions-related work to children since 2002. They were full-time missionaries in Mexico City during 2009 and 2010, where they helped to establish a community center for street children. Since they returned to the United States, Amy continued to serve with Pioneers and their children's ministry, Stand for Kids. God then opened the doors for Amy to work with the missions agency, Worldwide Evangelization for Christ, and their umbrella ministry, Crisis Care Training International. And that is where she serves at the moment in editing, marketing, and as an international online education coordinator. She's been doing that since 2012. She was recently named as the new director of education for that organization. She also homeschools her 2 sons, Caleb, age 15, and Jaden, age 9, and they live in Youngsville, and they've lived there since May of 2018. So Amy, thank you for coming this evening. I'd like to pray for you before you come and speak with us, and we look forward to hearing what God has laid on your heart for us. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Amy. I thank you for her heart for children that are hurting and families that are hurting. I know that you have laid an incredible message on her heart tonight, and I pray that you would give us hearts that are open, ears that are open to listen, and to just take to heart the message that she brings. I ask for your Spirit to guide her and lead her, to calm any nerves that may be there, and that she would just be just sensitive to your Spirit, Lord. I thank you for her. In Jesus' name, amen.
Is that working now? Okay, I think we're getting that straightened out. Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine, for that very sweet introduction, and I'm just grateful for that God's just been able to speak to me through your family, and they're just precious. I'm grateful for you guys. As Catherine said, I am Amy Wilson. I'm trying to figure out where to stand so I don't echo for you guys. For everything. And I'm here tonight to talk to you guys on care for the caregiver, but I'll give you a little bit of background of how I even got started into all of this and being able to talk to you about this for tonight. So hopefully this is working. This is my family, and so hopefully you've seen us here. We've been members here at Faith since August of 2018 and moved to the area, as Catherine said, in May of 2018. Prior to that, it's interesting to me to think about our life's journey and just where God's taken us on our paths, because Caleb, my oldest, before that, we had traveled and moved with him up to the age of 5, 14 times in all of our missions-related journeys. And so he was a flying and traveling pro. We're actually taking an airplane flight with my youngest, Jaden, who's 10 now, for the first time tomorrow. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of how different paths God has you on and places you at life at different times. We have done a lot of work in missions in areas up till about 2010 when God led us back home and did our street children ministry there. My husband has now been led to work on the physical side of things. When we came back, he went to school to become a PA and is working in orthopedics now. So for those of you who are looking for career paths midlife, it's definitely possible, and I can be glad to talk to you about that. So he's very gifted in that area, and I'm grateful that God's led him into that path, and God's continued to lead me onto the other side of areas of just emotional work and things that I'm doing now, and the missions work that I'm doing. I have more cards on the back table and things too, if you would like to learn a bit more about the ministry, but I'll describe that to you a little bit now. So the organization that I work with is a full-time missions program. It's called Crisis Care Training International, and it's offering healing and hope for children in crisis. So there's over 3 billion children throughout the world today that are, or 3 million, who are just suffering and have trauma-related crises, whether they're refugees, street children, coming from divorce, all varying areas, trafficking, all different areas. And so the founder of our organization, Dr. Phyllis Kilbourne, she saw the need for this as she was a missionary in Liberia and said, okay, there's no training out there for all of the missionaries who are on the field to know how to address these needs that they're seeing while they're trying to do their own ministry work. So she came back from that time and developed all of these amazing curriculums. And so we always end every single one of our curriculums, though, with 1 or 2 lessons on care for the caregiver, because we see that if you're not caring for yourself, you're not going to be able to care well for those that have been charged to you in that time. And so that is how I have been come to you to talk to you about that topic tonight, because every one of our curriculums does address that and sees the importance and need for that. So that's just a little bit about us and what I do, and I'll be glad to talk to you more again at the end about all of that. So tonight we're going to look at what is a caregiver, and even if you find that you aren't currently a caregiver, I believe a lot of you will find that somewhere in your life at different times you will be a caregiver, and if not, that you can still minister to a lot of those who are. So I hope that this will address both of you who may be out there this evening. So Webster's definition of what a caregiver is that it's a family member or paid helper who regularly looks after a child or a sick elderly or disabled person. And so I read through that definition and I was like, wow, that really does not address a lot of what a caregiver entails and what that looks like for a person. I understand that in the definite and dictionaries, we have to be succinct and give just a very clear, quick definition, but there's so much more involved in what a caregiver is. So hopefully we'll be able to flesh that out a little bit more tonight. And some of you who may not think that you're a caregiver now may see that you're actually on a lot of other areas through our time together this evening. So I'll give you time to write that down on the handout. It's the longest definition, I promise. You won't have to write much more than that. While you're writing that, I just want you to know how much value that God has for you as caregivers. How much as a caregiver, he really values you and uses you and serves you and has you in that role at this time in your life for a very unique purpose and reason, and how he's using you to minister to those that you are caring for. You'll see here, I've got all these varying things that we've just in researching and thinking about caregivers. There's so many different verses, but one that really sticks out to me is Proverbs 31, 8-9, where it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." So that's just such a beautiful example of what you're doing as a caregiver for that person that you are loving and caring on. As you can see, just looking through all of this, the concept and just discussion of mercy is found in 261 passages of the Bible. Compassion alone is talked about 41 times. Honoring your parents is 85 different verses in the Bible. We can see how God cared for Elijah and how when he called Elijah to go and care for the Israelites, and he fought for them and their right to worship. He was caring for Elijah. There's so many different examples. He took him to the creek during that time and provided water for him and had the ravens come and provide food for him, because he knew that he was weary and needed that rest and that sustenance and that care. He also took him over to the widow's home and provided for the oil and the bread and them, and just caring for him as well as that widow and her son during that time. So that's just such a beautiful example of the Bible. You see the beautiful example of Ruth caring for her mother-in-law, Naomi, also in the Bible, and just in her value for that person in that role, where a lot of people would have said, "No, you're not required to do this. Your husband has died. You have no obligation to that mother-in-law anymore." But she still had that value for her and what she had done in her life and wanted to go and serve her in that way. And of course, we see Jesus and his multiple examples throughout the New Testament, his ministry of care throughout all of his time here on earth. So hopefully through that slide alone right there, you see that there's been a case made for the value that God has for all of caregivers and how they are served through him in that way, in that capacity. But then we have to talk about what is God's concern for the care of a caregiver and themselves. He addresses the concept alone of being weary 96 times in his word. So we know caregiving is a very wearying and tiring position. It's definitely a labor of love. So you see his value for that. If something is mentioned multiple times in the Bible, I think we've all learned that it's something of definite importance to God. Throughout Jesus' ministry and how often he recognized the need for rest, and also how many times he went away to rest as well. So most of us are caregivers in some form, whether you're parents of children or of a spouse that you're caring for, maybe your own parents or in-laws, maybe even siblings or close friends that have been charged into being into your care. But you would think about that and just the need for the caregiver and what's going on in their lives. There's two concepts that I want you to think about, and how often, how weary you are and how often that is depends on the duration and the intensity of the care that you're giving. So duration in itself is the amount of time that my caregiving will last within a 24-hour period day. And you'll see in just a few minutes we're going to work on a chart and we'll talk about that more so. But think about that. Okay, how much am I giving direct time care for this person that is in my life over a 24-hour period of time? And then the intensity of that care. How long am I providing direct and focused attention to that person, giving all of my energy and emotional care for that person that is in my care? So I'm going to give you the example of my chart here and one of my sister-in-laws, actually. So the bottom line that you see here on this chart is mine. So as I mentioned, I homeschool my boys. And so our schooling time in the day, for them now being in 4th and 10th grade, it's usually taking around 4 hours a day, depending on whether I'm driving my oldest to some of his classes or directly teaching with him. And also I'm directly teaching my 10-year-old at all the time. So that's a lot of it. And then I've got our times of preparing the meals or direct time with them. So any of that, in this time of my life, it's about 8 hours. Now, when they were younger and as newborns, and as many of you are parents of newborns right now, you realize that time is much more, and it's a lot more involved in that time. You've got changing, feeding, constantly being there, keeping them alive. You're just providing all of their needs in a lot of different ways. So that's the time for that has lessened for me over time. Also, the intensity of it has lessened for me over that time because I'm not having to provide that direct care for them to survive at that time. So you can see I have about 8 hours of duration time for it, but as far as my time of direct individualized care for them is 4 hours. However, the line at the top there is that of my sister-in-law's. She has 3 children. Her middle child is 7 years old, and she was born with cytomegalovirus. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's a disease that she had in utero that she didn't realize. She personally, my sister-in-law, had called a cold, and that ended up turning into a virus for her child. And so when she was born with hearing loss as well as not being able to speak. She also has left side body weakness, and so she has to have braces and varying things at different times. And so now at this point in her getting into the early part of school, and she's in kindergarten at this point now, having to look at, okay, what else may be going on? Is there anything with autism? Is there anything going on with, she just started, unfortunately, having seizures, varying things that as the disease has progressed and different things, of just seeing how that's affecting her life and what care is involved. So that takes a lot of her immediate attention and immediate time. She also has her 9-year-old son, and she also has a 5-year-old, almost 5-year-old now as well. So she's very busy and has a lot of time. So her intensity and her amount of time that she's on, it's about 16 hours a day. With the middle child too, she doesn't sleep very well. So she's woken up a lot throughout the middle of the night, all of those things. And so we're hoping that she's getting 8 hours of sleep. I'm being generous probably in that too. But over that time, she's full on. And also that intensity line is almost at the same height there because she's on all the time. She's having to watch. So while her daughter is getting to a point now where she can go and play with her siblings and things like that, and it's not as intense as when she was a newborn, it's still pretty high on there where she's having to be in constant care there for her daughter, as well as for her other 2 children who are younger this time. So you can see, while we're both caregivers, mine looks a lot different from hers and what's going on in her life and things like that too. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding and thinking about duration and intensity in your care. Now, for those of you who aren't directly caring for someone right now, you can still be thinking about maybe someone in your life or someone that you know, someone as a neighbor or another family member who is giving care for somebody. So if you personally don't have an example of that right now, think about someone else's or something that may be coming up into your future where you know you're going to have to do this, and just sort of thinking through, okay, what type of care am I going to have to give? What realistically might that look like as far as the duration and the intensity of that goes? So I'm going to give you guys about 5 or 10 minutes here now, and I'll walk around if you have questions for that, just to be working on your own chart, because we're going to use those again later on in the evening too, so just to have that time, and then we'll start back with the rest of our time. Are there any questions before, because someone else may have that same question before we start on these? Yes. I'm sorry? Yes, absolutely. Yes, so I've got that there. So think about like feeding, changing, bathing, education, medical appointments if you're driving someone to and there or having to be directly involved with the medical care. Absolutely. Yeah, good question. Yes? This is in a day, yeah, 24-hour period of time. Mm-hmm. Can you hear me? Okay. Hopefully that is clear and everyone can hear me now for that. So as I walked around to each table, I'm seeing that everyone has all varying levels of care and different things that they have going on. And it's not very confusing. Some of you have high intense care for an individual or individuals 1 or 2 days. Some of you, it's every single day. Some are just like 5 days of the week and I get a break on the weekend. So you can see that it's going to vary over time. But overall, looking at that chart, if you're thinking about it, it's a 24-hour day. We put it up to 20 on your sheets because we're hoping you're going to at least get 4 hours of sleep, prayerfully. Hopefully more, but that's the reason that's not 24 on the duration time. But thinking about, okay, how much of the time am I with that person or persons if you have multiple people that you're caring for in that time? And then also how much of that time is directly being involved in giving direct care for them, that there's really no downtime from that individual. So again, thinking about my sister-in-law's lines here and what my line are, you can see, and your duration line at the top, it's never going to be less than your intensity. Because if their duration's there, your intensity level is going to vary based on how much care you're giving to those people. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit more for some of you. And then also, you'll see some more. You can change it as we're going through this, because we're going to be talking more about that. So don't feel like this has to be the be-all, end-all of your list, that you're done with it right now. So just thinking about this right now, too, for a few minutes. So the stresses of a caregiver, it's affecting you emotionally, it's affecting you physically, spiritually, and socially. All areas of your life are being affected as a caregiver. You've got to consider your interpersonal relationships and what those are looking like for you. So I know I was talking with a couple of ladies and talking about the intensity of caregiving for their children right now at the tables, and that's taking so much of their time and everything. And so then you have your spouse, and of course your spouse wants time with you as well, right? But you are so emotionally spent. You're like, oh my goodness, all I want to do right now is just go to sleep, but I need to think about that relationship with my spouse. How do I do that when I've given everything of myself to these kids or to my parents or whoever you're caring for right now? So thinking about those relationships, what is it looking like? Also, if you have a child who's demanding more of your attention and need of care, but you've got other kids as well, you've got to think about, okay, how are those children being affected? Am I giving time to them? Sure, it might not be able to be the same intensity of the time, but am I giving them direct, individualized attention too, and not making them feel like, okay, because I don't have this disability or I don't have this need or this level of care that I'm requiring right now, that I don't have just as much value. So really having to do that, and that's put so much stress on you to think about all of those different areas and all of those the personal relationships you have. So that's just the people within your house, much less your outside family, your outside friends, all of these things. Are you able to give any time for them at all? Are they able to come into your life and speak any time into your life? Looking into all of that. Thinking about what outlets you have during the week. So are you able to go to church, visit with friends, do any type of exercise for yourself, and having to be creative of that? Or what areas of your life have severely diminished because of your level and intensity and duration of the care that you're giving? So just thinking about that. And so what do the caregivers do when their compassion dries up and their stresses just become way too overwhelming? And so all of us, we've talked about, we're all at different seasons and places in our life right now. But again, if you're not there now, you may be at some point. And so this is some good things to think about, or how you can speak into another caregiver's life for them. So let's get back over to our slide. Let's see. Are we? Well, let's go. Make it ahead. There, well, no, it's all over the place. Okay, here we are. The care accomplishing for a care for yourself right here. The biggest thing is to rely on God. So we all know that, but that's a hard thing to do sometimes when you feel like, okay, the moment I wake up, I've got to be right there. I have got to be full on and ready to go in some situations. But I've got a good friend of mine. Actually, she's our director of the ministry that I'm involved with now with CCTI. And she lives with her mom who has severe dementia. And she was just telling me here recently, she's like, my first instinct is to get straight up out of bed and go and check on mom. She says, but my word for myself in this year is self-care. And she said, so first thing I do is, sorry, this is scratching me. Okay, how's that? No. How's that? No. Is that working? Okay, yay. Now that works. Yay. Okay. Great. So as I was saying with my friend who's the director of CCTI, first thing she's doing now is she's like, okay, before I even get to the point of going to check on mom and seeing if she's up or anything else, she started listening to this ministry called First 15. And she said, it's just 15 minutes of listening. She's like, I'll listen to it on my phone before I even get out of bed because I know if I start seeing different things that are going on around the house, I'm going to get involved in that and not take this time with God. So she'll lay there, listen to the ministry, to the whatever the devotional is. Sometimes it's a reading along with it or having to write anything, but she can just lay there and listen. She isn't just starting that way with God directly, first thing in the morning while still laying in bed before facing anything else. It's become just a huge area for her of just realizing, okay, I'm going to have to totally rely on God today. And this is a great way for me to just get my day started. So maybe that may be a resource that you can also use. Looking into your family and friends. If you can just say, okay, is there any family members who can help me out in this situation? Maybe it's one time a week. Start there. Or any friends who can come in and help with any different situations. Looking at community resources, whatever may be going on in your life, you can look at saying, okay, if it is someone with Alzheimer's or someone who has other areas, what resources are out there for senior care or for child care or different groups that can help me into these different areas, researching that and seeing what may be available. The church and the care networks and volunteers. There's just a wealth of resources alone in this room, much less throughout our entire church. If we call and say, hey, I've got this need, this is going on, you never know if someone who may have called at the same time and said, hey, I'm looking to plug in and pour into somebody's life. Is there anyone within the fellowship who has a need that I can go and help them with directly right now? God does amazing work like that a lot of times. And just being able to bring people together and have them peer up and say, hey, this is a person who's got this time and availability. They can come and pour into your life and helping you in your situation. Being realistic about what can be accomplished in your life and trusting God with saying, okay, Lord, you see my day, you know everything that is on my list of what's got to be accomplished, but I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you with that and being able to just say, you know what has to happen, and this is what's going to happen in this day, and being okay with that, and everything else will get moved to the next day. And do not let your care fall by the wayside. So making sure you're keeping up all of your medical appointments, keeping up all of those things, finding those people who can say, hey, this person will come in and sit with your kids, sit with your spouse or parents, whoever it may be, during that time so that you can make sure you're taking care of yourself. Considering your diet, your exercise, your rest and sleep. I know I've heard so many varying caregivers talking about, oh, I'm putting on so much weight right now because I'm just having to eat whatever I can grab. You're really having to think about that and plan for that. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes of how you can get more towards that too. Giving yourself credit for what you've accomplished. That, as I said earlier, God has so much value for you, and what you're doing is such a tremendous ministry for your loved ones. So giving yourself credit for that and realizing, okay, this is the season and where God has me right now in my life, and He is grateful for me in doing this. This is where He had me, and this is where He wants me for this time, and just feeling proud of that too. And not feeling guilty if you lose patience along the way. We're human, and all of us are going to lose patience at some point. So just making sure that you know that it's all God, and that He didn't intend for us to live in isolation, that He knows that, okay, I'm needing this help, and it's okay if I have those moments of impatience or of just feeling inadequate, turning it back to Him all those times. So one of the things that we have in our core module, which is the Trauma and Crisis Care module, is the STOP model. And that STOP model has 4 main elements. So if you really think about it, it's like, okay, I need to stop. And I've got to plan structure. I've got to plan the talking and time for the T, organized play, and parental support. Now this is something, as we're doing these trainings, we tell the caregivers to do for those that they're caring for. But this is something that they need to do for themselves as well. So in the structure, you know yourself with the basically of how intense your day is when you're looking at your chart again and thinking about that. You've got to be spot on in a lot of those situations of knowing how your day is going to look, having it planned out to the second. Some of you, it's that intense, unfortunately. And so knowing like, okay, I've got to be on, I've got to get to this medical appointment, I have to get to this, do this. This person needs this medication at this time, this person needs to be changed, whatever the situation. So you've got to have your day planned out. So the more you can structure your time, as well as that time for yourself, the better it's going to be. So really, if you're not a scheduler type person you're now, or you don't really plan things out, I would highly recommend that you try. Start for just a day and seeing how much of an improvement that can make for yourself. I'll tell you, okay, let me put this into a daily planner, really think through what's going to make tomorrow go easier for myself. So structure that time, and then also in that, start small. Think about, okay, let me structure a 15-minute break for myself where I'm able to go outside, take a walk. Well, then you're accomplishing 2 things. You're getting some physical care for yourself, some exercise in there. You're also getting a break and just being able to walk away and not have to be there directly because you've already scheduled someone else to come in for that time. Take those small baby steps and keep sort of working up to those levels of what you're needing. The talking and time. So you need that time to talk with others, whether it's your spouse or siblings, about the care of the person that you are taking care of. You need to talk to them about that and, plan for those things. Like, okay, are you going to be the one to get them to this medical appointment this week? Or, how do you think things are going for mom right now? Or whatever the situation is. But you also very, very much need that time to not talk about that person that you're caring for. You desperately need to make sure that you are walking away from that. So again, going back to those other interpersonal relationships you have and saying, okay, the person that we're caring for is taken care of right now. We don't need to think about this. I spoke with another lady in the room tonight before our time here, and she was saying that there's been another individual here that has just given them an incredible gift of being able to come in and take care of their child. And so she and her husband now have been able to schedule and use some of this that we've gone through and have like 6 hours now. They're getting 2 to 3 hour Saturdays before they were just able to go for a bike ride for the first time in a long time here the other day. And so it's just how wonderful that was, just for them to be able to get out, have direct time for just them, and not have to worry about their child because of the gift that other person is giving them and coming in and speaking into their lives. things like that. That is just going to be huge. And so they got to talk about just themselves and their lives and their marriage and what's going on with them. And that's so vitally important. So make sure you have that time. Of course, you've got to have that time also to talk about those realities of the care being given. But make sure you have that separate time too. The organized play. So this is something you often think about with kids, but it's important for every single one of us. We've got to be able to have those breaks, those times, whatever it is that you enjoy doing, whether it's playing games. For me, that would be wonderful. My husband, not a game person, so that wouldn't be a thing that we would do together. But think about what are those things that you do enjoy doing together, or just on your own. Having that on your own time is vital as well. So thinking about, okay, is it going to be out and just having time for me to go and exercise right now? Or being able to just be able to go to the store. I've heard several of you talk about that, and I completely get that. Going to the grocery store by yourself is a gift sometimes. It totally is a gift. So whatever that is, but make sure it's something fun too, not just having to get that other thing checked off the list. I know how much we like to multitask, and so that's a great thing sometimes, but sometimes just making sure it's something that does not have to be accomplished at the same time just for yourself. So any kind of hobbies, anything like that that you can plan for yourself, those all count into that for adults. And then the parental support. So we think about that of like who those other people are for those who are needing to be cared for, but who is the one for you? Who is that support person for you that's going to be there for you when you're having those moments of doubt, insecurities, exhaustion, any of that, where you can just come to them and say, I need help. You know, we all need at least one person. Hopefully you've got many more than that. But at least having one of those people in your life is saying, okay, I'm going to help you with this situation. Or you get to that point, you're at the end of your rope, and you just say, okay, I don't know even where to turn, what to do right now at this point. Help me with that. So having someone in your life that can speak to you and help you with that is very vital. Or maybe you aren't in that season right now of being a caregiver. Can you be one of those people for somebody else, looking at somebody that you know as a caregiver and saying, okay, can I come and bring a meal for you for this week? Or can I come and sit with this person for you for a couple hours? You know, doing those types of things and looking for those people. I've got a very sweet neighbor across the street from us whose wife has Alzheimer's. And so we've just gotten into a weekly thing where I call and check on them every week and say, hey, can I get something at the store for you, or different things like that. But I've also just started taking meals over to him every Monday. And it's sure, the meal is a huge help to him because he's like, I don't cook, and so this has been great. But it's also the more of the 15 to 20 minutes that I spend with him in that time of just talking to him and saying, hey, how are things going with you and your wife this week? What's been the latest? Or any of those kinds of things. And just having that time alone, he definitely appreciates the meal, but just having that 20 minutes gives him something to look forward to, and knowing, hey, someone else is going to be, involved in our caring of in our lives. And so he's been really just grateful for that. And it was just something that God laid in my heart. Didn't really think about what was going to develop out of that. And so we've been doing this for about a year and a half now. And it's been a great blessing for the both of us. So just thinking about that, if you can be that person for someone else right now too, just to give them something to look forward to. Having hope, as we all know, is a huge thing. If you have something to look forward to, that's a huge thing. So just thinking about that. And I'm grateful, actually, when I heard tonight that Amber Hart's going to be speaking on the biblical rest. That's huge. So I'm so glad that that's going to be the topic that follows after this in a couple weeks. So that is pretty much everything that I had for you guys for this evening. We're going to have just a little bit of time. You can look in your sheets there and see the group activities that we have to do together. But before that, I just wanted you guys to think, now we all are mask weary at this point in life. I was being a year out. This is a different kind of mask, so don't think about that one. This is the one from the airport, and thinking about when you're on the airplane. Think about this one for yourself. And so when you put on your mask, they always tell you to do it first before you do that for the child or the other person you're with. And they're telling you that because you may be at that point where if you lose oxygen, you're not going to be able to care for that person. It's the same thing for yourself in this situation as a caregiver. If you become burned out, if you become so weary that you're not able to be there for them, then it's doing neither of you any good. You're doing this for this person because you love them, but also you're going to be loving them by taking care of yourself. So think a lot about that. And I love that in the Matthew 25:31-46, where God says, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me as well." So think about that and how much value and love God has for you as the caregiver and what you're doing. But he also wants you to have that time of rest. So as we get into our group discussions and the activities you have there, share your intensity and duration charts with one another. I'll come around and talk with you more about those too and help you work them out or think about it a little bit differently if you need to as well. And then think about what you have going on too, just like developing your own stop model. What can I do to speak to that structure, that talking in time, making sure I have some organized play and parental support. So start listing out some of those or brainstorm with each other at the tables. If any of you, raise your hand if any of you are not currently a caregiver right now, if you're not currently a caregiver. Okay, so if you guys will get together, it looks like we could actually maybe do 2 tables. So for those of you who are not a caregiver right now, these guys I think are all together, but then the other 3 of you, if you want to come up to this table and think about some ways that you could be helping others or some things that you've seen that others have done that you could be speaking into other caregivers' lives, some just resources you know or things that you could personally be doing. I think that would be wonderful for that. And then most importantly, spend the time in prayer for one another, because this is a hard thing that God has called you to, but just being praying for one another and just thanking God for the loved one that he has given you to be able to serve and minister to in this way. And just pray that you can care for yourself equally as well. So thank you guys so much, and I'll be walking around throughout this time to answer any questions. Take a break. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. That part. Okay, so 15-minute break, and then we'll get back to all those things.